To me, however, the real climax of science fiction is the fact that on July 20th, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. I was watching on television, and the appearance of Neil Armstrong in his spacesuit, the spaceship from which he descended, the quality of the terrain, everything about it was precisely what I had been reading about in the 1940s, precisely what I had seen in science fiction illustrations, precisely what I saw in Destination Moon. The world of the 1940s that I had been so immersed in had come to actual life exactly in 1969.
At first glance, it seems like there are numerous science fiction video games, but if you take a closer look at just about any of them, you'll find that they are mostly all science fantasy. But what is the difference? Well, a few years ago, Extra Credits put out a video about this very subject, and they defined the difference as such.
It's the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars. Star Trek tries to make you feel like the things going on in each episode could happen in our universe. In Star Trek, they want you to believe that a transporter could possibly be a device that might actually someday be made. They want you to believe that faster-than-light travel was solved through an act of engineering. Star Wars, on the other hand, simply wants you to embrace the Force. You accept that it's just something that exists in that universe. Sure, it may have robots and it may have spaceships, but at its heart, it's a fantasy adventure filled with magic where you believe in it because you love to believe in it.
In other words, sci-fi asks that you believe the improbable rather than embrace the impossible. So let's make a spectrum. We'll have sci-fi over here on the left and sci-fan on the right. So when you design a video game, you generally design the gameplay first and then base the story and the setting around that. So think about the enemy design in a game like Dead Space. The shooting mainly focuses on dismembering the enemies, so the necromorphs their limbs are very accentuated to emphasize that. And compare that to a game like Titanfall or Halo, where you're generally fighting humanoids. If a mechanical dragon from Final Fantasy suddenly showed up in Halo, it would completely destroy your immersion because your immersion is mostly dependent on its believability. Some games have used really clever excuses to justify their ridiculous design, making the enemies demons from hell or highly irradiated creatures in a post-nuclear apocalyptic wasteland. But enemy design is hardly all that matters in video games, especially story-driven video games like Mass Effect. In Mass Effect, you're a Spectre, which basically means you're this galactic problem solver with a ship and a crew. And the game definitely delivers on that Star Trek fantasy of traveling around to various star systems with an ensemble cast, meeting aliens, fighting bad guys, and other adventurous things. But Mass Effect never asks the player to wait long amounts of time between those planets. Jumping across the galaxy with the Mass Effect relays is actually a skippable cutscene. And this is a good thing for sure. I'm not saying that it should have been designed differently, but it makes the game slide a bit to the right on the fantasy scale. BioWare wants the player's experience to be marvelous. If the goal of science fiction is, as John W. Campbell put it, to make the marvelous seem mundane, and then the mundane will seem marvelous, then video games mostly let us down by giving us these fantastical experiences in science settings. After all, the purpose of a video game is to be fun.
If it's not fun, why bother?
So it's difficult to pitch a video game around being mundane. The argument goes that if you're watching characters on screen or reading about them in a book, you're totally removed from them. So seeing them treat marvelous things as mundane can make those things and the world they live in all the more marvelous to us detached observers. But when you are the character, when you're the player, you can't pull that same trick. So as a result, the zone to the left here is barren. There is one game that comes to mind actually, Moonbase Alpha. It's technically fiction. It's an interesting game, but not exactly fun.
Okay, got a fresh welding torch coming right up.
Oh, nice.
Thanks, bro.
But this video is about one particular candidate, Elite Dangerous. Elite Dangerous is this online open-ended spaceflight game from Frontier Developments. You start with this small spaceship, a small amount of money, and you're supposed to make your way in an open galaxy of about 20,000 inhabited star systems populated with space stations, outposts, megaships, whatever. There are galactic factions which players can further themselves either legally or illegally with trading, mining, bounty hunting, piracy, assassination, stuff like that. What's important is that the galaxy is based on our own Milky Way. Here's our solar system in a presumptive future some 1,300 years out. So we're coming up on Mars now. You'll see that it's not the red planet that it is today, because in this game Mars has been terraformed. We can't land on Mars, at least not yet, but we can dock with Mars High, a massive orbital space station. So in order to dock with Mars High, we need to request docking permission. Assuming there are landing pads available, and sometimes there aren't, the station will assign us one pad and direct us toward it. Larger ships obviously require larger landing pads. This is something you need to repeat every time you visit any space station. You need to go through this whole process of manually requesting docking permission and parking. Once you do that though, you could refuel, resupply, load, unload cargo or passengers, outfit your ship, buy new ships, take missions, read the news, whatever. Stations are the hubs of human activity, but the distance between these hubs are astronomically vast because the solar systems in Elite Dangerous are rendered to scale. That means that in order to travel between celestial bodies at any reasonable speed, we need to break the light barrier. And in Elite, the answer to FTL travel is with a device called the frameshift drive. The frameshift drive can operate in two modes, the first of which is supercruise. Supercruise allows us to fly very fast between various stellar bodies, but the distances between planets are nothing compared to the distances between stars. It would still take days to use supercruise to travel to our closest neighbor, Alpha Centauri, 4 light years away. So to make that kind of jump, we use the frameshift drive's second mode, hyperspace. Hyperspace is the most fantastical element of this game by far, but even in all its marvel, it is still a very limited mechanic. You can't use hyperspace to jump from one side of the galaxy to the opposite side. Depending on how good your frameshift drive is, you still peak out at around 50 light years per jump, which means that traveling extremely long distances requires the player to hop from one star to the next star to the next star. It's tedious, because the first time you make a hyperspace jump, it is incredible. The visual effects of witch space followed by emerging by this massive star. But as you play, and you end up making hundreds if not thousands of these hyperspace jumps, it definitely does become mundane. Now remember when I said that there were 20,000 inhabited star systems? Well, they form what's called the bubble of human-occupied space, which is about 300 or so light years in diameter. But that 20,000 star count is negligible compared to the estimated 400 billion stars in our home galaxy, the Milky Way. And Elite Dangerous does not pussy out about that. You can actually travel to any star in the entire galaxy. Which means in order to reach the center of the galaxy, it would take days and thousands of hyperspace jumps. There are explorers that have explored the galaxy for the 4 years since the game came out, and still, we've barely traveled to 0.1% of the available star systems the game has rendered. Now, Elite Dangerous is not the first space game to feature absurdly large universes. No Man's Sky, for example, procedurally generated universe upon universe. But Elite's galaxy is not an imaginary setting. like No Man's Sky. It uses science data from about 150,000 stars, and then the game procedurally generates the rest, filling in the blanks of what we have yet to discover. Now, this is just my opinion, but I don't find Elite Dangerous particularly fun, at least not in the traditional sense. It's enjoyable in the same way Euro Truck Simulator is enjoyable. The day-to-day life of a starship pilot isn't that much more marvelous than the day-to-day life of a truck driver today. Both need to endure long travel times and find parking when they arrive. This is why Elite Dangerous might be the first genuine science fiction game. It allows the experience to become mundane because it does not compromise on the specific mechanics centered around flying your starship. And this makes the world appear all the more marvelous. Maybe humanity will one day become a spacefaring civilization, but it won't make the universe any less vast, and it certainly won't make life marvelous. Perhaps we were born too early to experience that ourselves, but we can still dream.